The story of cruising is not as important, in my mind, as the cinematic value of cruising and the look of the film and what Billy Friedkin brought to that.
Most of the crew I had worked with on previous films. Jimmy Contner was a great camera operator. I knew him over the years, and I asked him if he thought he was ready to light a picture. And he said, yes, I think I'm ready. And so I let him be the DP on cruising.
I think he wanted to fight against some of the drama of it, so we didn't go into heavy shadow. I had actually was trying to get Billy to shoot it in black and white.
I've heard stories of your midnight moves.
It's such a black and white world. I mean, you look at the way people dress. Actually, we kind of succeeded in shooting the film in black and white, but in color. If you notice, there's very little color in the movie. It's all monochromatic. A lot of leather and white T-shirts and black jeans. And so it kind of has that flavor anyway of being a black and white movie, but it doesn't have the real texture of a black and white movie.
Long before we got in the street to physically do this movie, the community was aware. They certainly were aware of the book. And it had been in the newspapers that this movie was going to be made. We went out and secured the services of the community to be a part of the movie. And they truly came and were a part of the movie. Now, as the movie was being made, there then became another side of that community that had balked, if you will, at the making of this movie.
I view every film as an adventure and an education. And the demonstrations were a complete surprise to me, but they kicked in almost at the beginning. There were a lot of protests against the film in the press and then publicly, and I understood them. I understood where they were coming from. I also understood that the demonstrators were trying to shut down free speech. There were a lot of high-profile gay figures in New York and elsewhere around the country, and politicians who put a lot of pressure to close the movie down and not let it film.
There was the deliberate attempt to make a lot of noise, usually with whistles and some sort of blaster, some air horns, which would ruin the sound takes.
In some cases, they got access to apartments next to where we were shooting and would turn the stereo way up.
We were in New York for a month and a half just ADRing actors, replacing their dialogue because while Billy was shooting, it would screw up all the dialogue.
And then actually they were quite clever. Some activists would get on some of the rooftops and near the set where we were shooting with big reflectors, and they would reflect light onto the set, so throw off the whole lighting setup, and that too would be very disruptive.
There were a couple thousand guys out on the street chanting some slogans of "Hey, hey, ho, ho, movie cruising's got to go."
There were literally times where they had to come get me from my dressing room and escort me down to the set.
I had never seen the ferociousness of the people who didn't want that movie done. Figure that most movies get 3 or 4 cops on a movie from the movie unit. We had 300 cops there.
It was madness, total madness. The gay community was up in arms, and I went to meetings every 15 minutes with the gay community and the Gay Alliance and this, and then my friends, all my friends that wouldn't talk to me for 6 months that were gay.
There were 2 factions of the gay world then, and there were nights when we were filming when there were thousands of people yelling and screaming and throwing cans and rocks and bottles. And joining us on our side were more thousands of guys who supported the leather bars.
I remember we went into the luncheonette coffee shop to film, to rehearse that scene. And in the half hour or so that we were in the coffee shop, a crowd of probably a couple hundred people had formed outside the coffee shop and had basically stopped traffic, stopped all commerce on the street. They realized they had to get Al out of the coffee shop, and he would have to go through this crowd. There was no back way. So his bodyguards say, well, I'll call my office uptown, and I will get 10, 12 guys to come down here, and we'll make a human wedge. The car will be pulled up to the corner, and you'll just run through the wedge into the car, and we'll take off. He was sitting there very morose, and I walked up to him and I said, Al, can I come with you? He said, what? I said, you know, I'm never going to have to leave anywhere in a wedge. I'm never going to be famous like Al Pacino. I want to go. It's like the Beatle escape, right? So he said, okay, you think this is funny? Sure, okay. And sure enough, they made this wedge. They throw open the door, and these people yelling, Mr. Pacino, Mr. Pacino! And the protesters are screaming, and the cameras are there saying, can we speak to you? Can we speak to you? And I run with Al and Pacino into the wedge, into the back door. The car pulls away. I was laughing upwards. I said, that was great. That was great. And Al's in the front seat like this.
But Billy was undaunted by all the pressure, and if he went through anything, maybe he went home and screamed in the bathtub, but I never saw him flinch. You know, he would have made a good cop.
And of course, in hindsight, I realized that cruising was not the best foot forward that you can put as an argument for the acceptance by heterosexual people of the gay lifestyle. It was never meant to be emblematic of anyone's lifestyle, but it did exist. And to me, it was a background for a murder mystery, period. Yet it became a cause célèbre for others to try and show that certain insensitive people like myself were using the mainstream media to slander gay people, which could not have been further from the truth.
Are you afraid?
Should I be?
In terms of violence in cruising, I had depicted these murders the way I had heard about them.
Now I'm afraid.
The way I had been given the facts through police department files about how certain victims had been murdered. What I decided to do was have what appeared to be one common murder weapon. So this would lead you to believe that all the victims were the victims of the same killer, because there appeared to be this long-bladed, serrated steak knife that did the killings.
This is what you're looking for.
But it isn't really clear whether it is or not. Of course, the other thing I had in mind with the knife, of course, was the metaphoric idea of penetration. You know, that the knife penetrating flesh was similar to the act of sexual penetration, and that this was probably something that motivated the killer or killers, ultimate penetration. I didn't want to be any more graphic or violent than what you see in Psycho, which, as I say, is an illusion of graphic murder. So I never felt it was a very important part of cruising to have the murders be too graphic.
I remember the day that they shot my death scene.
The landlady discovered the body about 2:30 a.m.
They laid me down by the toilet bowl, and there I was, and there was a David Bowie album cover, and there was this picture of David Bowie on the cover, kind of like this. It was this odd picture. I can't remember who took it, but it was this akimbo kind of pose, and he showed it to me. He said, "This is what I want you to do on the floor. I want you to be in this kind of odd, broken doll sort of pose." So I thought that was pretty genius. You know, I thought that was a great thing to do. And they said, we have to put 57 stab wounds on you. I thought, you know, one didn't kill me, you know, but they wanted it to be the most extreme, and in a way, sort of the sacrificial lamb character in the movie.
Billy wanted a bloodbath in there. I remember, more blood, and he wanted to really be horrific to look at. That was about as graphically bloody as we got, I think.
The one next door is registered in the name of John Forbes. The landlady thinks it's a phony because she ain't seen him in a couple of days.
What's that name?
John Forbes.
Because he also was trying to lead the audience. He really wanted the audience to think it was Al, and Al had displayed quite a violent temper in an earlier scene.
You're in love with him! You love him, don't you?
I felt that I wanted to portray the idea that the murders were unsolved, really, there were many possibilities of who the murderers could be. It just seemed to me that it was a metaphor for so much that happens in our lives, the mystery of fate.
I can't believe you're not afraid.
In the first killing in the St. James Hotel, Larry Atlas is the killer and Arnaldo Santana is the victim.
Where are you, man? Come on.
And then in the Central Park killing, you have Larry Atlas, who was the killer in the St. James killing, and he's being killed by Richard Cox. So then you have in the Peep Show, the guy who walks into the Peep Show is Arnaldo Santana, who is the victim of the first killing. And the killer inside the Peep Show is actually Richard Cox.
I said, turn over.
And then on top of all that, you've got all the actors being dubbed by another actor who never appears on screen, and that's James Sartorius.
Oh, that's too bad. How about the park?
And sometimes the words that come out of my mouth are in my father's voice, which was also James Sartorius.
You know what you have to do.
That voice was recorded after the scene was shot. We re-recorded it.
You made me do that.
So he's in some kind of schizophrenic way acting out his father or being his father.
That voice also is in Cox's scene, in the very last scene of him in the hospital. They use the same voice actor to put in his mouth of, I never killed anyone.
I never killed anyone.
A lot of people asked me, so who is the killer? And my standard answer was, who do you want it to be?
I don't know who that character is that's entering the club at the beginning and the end.
I don't know. I don't know who do you think the killer is?
I think one of the things that Billy was saying is that there's this X factor out there, that there's a violent killer always lurking that goes on. There'll always be another.
That's something that, is enigmatic enough to unsettle the audience, that's all.
You want to play? I'll play with you.
I had always felt that cruising should be an unsettling experience.
I'm back. Can I stay?
Sure.
Since the whole movie is about transformation, it occurred to me somewhere along the line that the only real female character in the film should have her own transformation, at least visually. And the shot of Pacino shaving and then finally just staring into the mirror at the audience is something I had in mind throughout as being the next to last shot of the film. What it's meant to suggest or to say is, when you look at someone, do you really know who they are? Do you know who I am? Do you know what I am? Do I know? And who are you? I had no intention of making a statement, one way or the other, about what was happening in the leather bars. I went in pretty much with documentary-type cameras and recorded what I saw. And there's no comment made in the film about what the audience is seeing. There's no comment from me or from any character in the film that this is right or wrong or immoral or moral or whatever. And that's how I feel about it today.
I knew that this film was way, way ahead of its time. And I knew it was going to be probably the most difficult film to make than any film I would ever do in my career. And it turned out to be that. But it was an experience, and it had to be done, and it had to have a director who wouldn't quit, who had the edge and the stick-to-itiveness and no fear, and that's Billy Friedkin.
I think by the end of the filming, I was so drained. I don't think I had any sense of what it was going to be. It was a huge undertaking, really difficult. We didn't have a lot of money. We were very ambitious. Billy was very tough. It was a controversial subject. It was a movie that could have gone any way. So there was a real sense of, I don't know what it's going to be.
Editing is something that I think is probably the most creative part of making the film. And I've very often gone in, because of the freedom of the cutting room, and changed sequences, changed the order of scenes, used the editing room as a kind of experimental bin as well. And in cruising, there is subliminal imagery. The whole notion of the subliminal is that it is not something that you are to be directly conscious of. I've used subliminal imagery in many of my films, because to me it's the way the mind works.
You made me do that.
What's graphic is what Billy makes you feel, because a lot of it you don't see, and a lot of it you hear. It's more what he's created in your mind, which is what film is about.
I've always conceived of the films I've made, the soundtrack, being completely separate from the photography, completely separate. The sound should be saying and doing more. Subtle little sound effects that often cannot be heard but are subliminal.
I was instrumental in hiring the sound people to do that, and that was Chuck Campbell and his company, and they hired this guy, John Resch, who was a great Foley man for all the footsteps and the leather squeaking and all the stuff and the chains rattling, and because they all wore chains and leather boots and leather jackets and leather hats, so that all has a character of squeaking.
And then comes the music, a layer of music, which has its own path. Bud Smith introduced me to Jack Nietzsche, who did a lot of sounds and additional music for The Exorcist. But the kind of sound and music that Jack was skilled at doing at that time was not using musical instruments. He would just rub on the edges of a glass to get a kind of a mournful tone. He would do various other things with non-musical instruments to produce music. I like the idea of the music to be used more like tones, like a cold hand on the back of your neck.
And Jack did a brilliant job of not only scoring it, but finding the right groups to record.
It was the beginning of the punk movement, and some of the groups in cruising were some of the great punk and grunge artists of the 70s in Los Angeles. The music of the gay bars were not as edgy then as the music in cruising is. It's very edgy and dark, and the songs are great. We had a lot of trouble with the ratings board, and I do remember there was a preview of the film in New York in a theater on the East Side, and I was walking from my apartment to the theater to show up at this press conference after the film had been shown to an enormous horde of media. And I remember as I was walking toward the theater, the screening had just emptied out, and I saw just a few people that I knew coming out, and one of them said, "Are you going in there to do a press conference?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Wow, are you going to be in trouble?" And I went in, and That whole press conference was a screaming match. Most of the reviews were highly negative on all counts, which changed some 10 or 12 years later. Now, I have no idea what the reaction to Cruising will be today. It may be just as virulent, for all I know, because I wasn't prepared for its initial reaction. But I do believe that with what has come along since Cruising, both in terms of motion pictures and lifestyles, that it will at least be more understood. Perhaps not. I know that Cruising is a controversial film. I knew it when I made it. I didn't know to what extent, and I know it now.
I'm scared to death of Cruising myself.
It's a world unto itself.
My hopes have been realized for that film. It's been recognized, and it is recognized, and people know it. It's a title that everybody who goes to film knows.
I need to talk to you, but I want to tell you everything.
Whether you like it or hate it, it's very unconventional, and it's original. It doesn't owe itself to anything. There is no film that I ever saw that is like that. As I look at it, I can understand now a lot of what I didn't understand, which is its power to affect people at some of their deepest levels.
How'd you like to disappear?
I don't think I can handle it.
I never killed anyone.
I'm doing it's effective.
I need to be worshipped and adored.
One day this whole city's gonna explode.
Now I'm afraid.
I wish just once you'd say something positive to me. There's a lot about me, you know. Don't let me lose you.
You know what you have to do.